Welcome to the Teen Life Podcast, where we believe that teenagers are not a problem to be solved, but we are here to help you equip teenagers through the power of connection. I'm Karlie Duke, and I am back with Chris Robey.
Hey, guys.
Chris, so I am excited about our episode today because you're taking a lead on this first one and giving us some really good tips on task gamification, which we've I feel like briefly mentioned and talked about, but I'm excited to learn more about what this is and how we can use it for our teenagers.
Yeah, I think this episode all started like a lot of our other episodes with like a social media post, right? Something that kind of got the wheels turning. I follow a guy named George Mack that he kind of resides on Twitter. He's a productivity guy. He's kind of out of the box thinker when it comes to kind of bettering yourself and your business and those kinds of things. And he had a short post, and we'll link it here in the notes, just about this idea of a lot of it was around using the better using the Notes app on the iPhone, but it was kind of the way he would use it. And he was talking about getting difficult things done, and he referenced this idea of task gamification and this idea that, you know, when things are difficult, sometimes getting started isn't really, it's not because we don't want to, it's because we don't have the right incentives and we're not leveraging kind of the way we're put together. And I don't know if you have ever really gotten stuck on something before. I know our teenagers have gotten stuck on different tasks, different projects, you know, of trying to get moving in a certain direction. But sometimes it is really all about the first steps. Like how do you get yourself moving in the right direction? We talk about this a lot in our groups, where, okay, you know, something might seem insurmountable, some change might need to happen. But sometimes it's like, where do I even begin? It gets really, really complicated. And the way that George Mack titles that, he writes about this idea of how do you video game a to-do list. And so I think your hubby might be more into video games than you are. I'm not really sure, but yeah, so I don't know how much you are there, but and at a time in my life, I was much more into video games, but there's a reason that they're so popular, right? It's because the designers make them so addicting. And you see, you know, you hear about kids just spending hours and hours and hours on a video game, but you don't hear about them spending hours and hours and hours on something productive, like a task or
Sure.
homework or any of those kinds of things. And there's a reason for that, is because of our dopamine systems, that kind of the way that we're put together. Video game designers know how to do that, of giving different levels and different tasks some kind of reward or some kind of like incremental steps, and it keeps us coming back for more and more and more. We're kind of there's a reason that slot machines work, right? Because it just you get that every now and then, you get that feedback where you want to continue moving along those tasks. So his recommendation is, okay, if that is true, then if there's something that you want to try to do that is good for you, but you don't know how to get started, break it down into levels instead of actual like things to check off. So if you're going to get started on something, you want to say, well, what's level 1? Like, what's the easiest level? So think about the last game that you played. What's the what do you do in the first level, and then what do you have to do to get to the second level, and the third level, and the fourth level, and then by the time you hit that last level, you have gained everything you need to accomplish that last level. So before we go into that, how does that strike you, Karlie, as maybe I'm assuming you don't really play a lot of video games, but
No, but like, I don't know. I don't as much anymore now that I have kids, but like I used to play games on my phone and stuff like that, and levels. I do think, I mean, we talked about this a few episodes ago when we talked about like breaking out tasks, especially for our ADHD students. And so I like that this is very similar. You're breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, but you're adding this game element that I feel like would be especially attractive for our kids and for our teenagers. And I've done this a little bit. Obviously, you wouldn't do this as much with teenagers, but for example, like if I'm trying to lose weight, then like once you hit a certain point, you get like this reward system kind of kicks in.
Right.
Or things like at work, if there's a task I just really don't want to do, I'm like, all right, if I'll spend 10 minutes on it, then I get 5 minutes to go do something I want to do. And then I'll come back and start again. Like that kind of stuff, I really think can like almost trick your brain into like, I know I don't want to do this, but I'm going to give myself stopping points and also rewards. And also, like you said, that bit of dopamine to keep going. And so I can see how this would be really successful.
Yeah. And I think you really hit on something there, is that our brains have to be tricked.
Yeah.
Our brains are our biggest problem sometimes. We think too hard about it. We're our brains are wired for homeostasis and kind of keeping things as they are now. And so pushing sometimes isn't as natural as we would like it to be. And George Mack, he talks about this. Sometimes we are trying to start at level 20 instead of starting at level 1. And that's why we often don't achieve the things we want to achieve, or our students maybe don't, they're thinking about the test itself and how overwhelming that is, not necessarily what do I need to do to get to that test where I can actually beat level 20. Sure. You have to go through those levels to get there. Let's try this out, Karlie. Okay. And as we were planning this, we're like, should we do this or not? And we'll give this a try and see what would it take to plan out a short video game that would accomplish making an A on a final. Okay. And so there's this big final that's at the end of the year. And I think this is relevant for so many of our students that, we releasing this right around the end of the school year. And so some might be done with school, but some might be kind of wrapping up all of our tests. And so how do you actually, this will be a placeholder for any big challenge that your student is facing. Let's plan out a 5-level video game. Level 1 being, and what we'll do is level 1, I'll give you the first one, is we are going to plan a video game for it to have a successful final. So we're going to plan levels. So really only have 3 different levels we're going to plan. And level 5 is making an A on the final. What would level 2 be? We're making the plan. What's level 2?
So if I was making this video game, I was a flashcard person. So I think I would create flashcards.
All right. So we're going to create flashcards. Level 2 is accomplished. Level 3, I would think, is establish a schedule to review the flashcards. Yeah. So I'm going to say every night before bed, I'm going to spend 15 minutes reviewing flashcards. That's level 3. Level 4.
Well, I mean, I would think it would actually be to do the flashcards. And if you want to throw in like do the flashcards until you can quickly go through all of them and not have to flip them to find the answer. Like if you almost want to set a goal on it, I think if you can do that successfully, you would make an A on your final.
I think so too. So we just planned out a 5-level video game. Now you can add incentives with all that if you want to. Like if you complete level 1 and you move to level 2, then you get the dessert of your choice, or you get some kind of reward. Maybe you get more video game time. Who knows? Any of those kinds of things that you would put on there. So that's a quick 5-level video game that results in A on a final. And so we can substitute any number of things in here that would be really, really helpful. But it leverages once you complete that first level of playing the video game. Oh, okay. Well, maybe I can do level 2 now and make those flashcards. And once those flashcards are made, why wouldn't I go to level 3 and plan that out? And if I've got all this work on level 3, let's get level 4 knocked out, because you're building momentum to get to that level 5. Pretty cool, huh?
It is. And I like that it almost makes it competitive. Of like, all right, I've got to beat this. And I'm going to go to the next one because I finished that one, and let's see how we can do it. I also think this could be a fun thing to do with friends. Or if you had a study group, like if you said as a study group, let's create this plan together and let's see who can get through the 5 levels and who can get the best grade at the end too. Like almost adding a game on top of a game.
Oh yeah, exactly. And you really, you hit the segue button to our next section. You didn't know there was one, but yeah,
Oh, hey, okay.
yeah, exactly. So because it does, you hit that on the head, is that you can do this by yourself, obviously. But you can, there are ways you can gamify things like this where you kind of compete against yourself, compete against the clock, or compete against other people, where it becomes fun. At the end, the same thing gets done, right? We could do it without gaming it, or we can do it with gaming it. And this makes it more fun. This makes it to where maybe we can achieve bigger things just by gamifying. And the other ways we can gamify tasks, one of them we actually do here at our house quite a bit, is racing the clock. One of the things I've learned that really motivates my children is a ticking clock. And so sometimes I'll say, hey, we need to clean downstairs. I'm setting a 10-minute timer. Let's see what we can get done in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it works, man. It's like they get after it, and they're getting as much, and we get so much done in a 10-minute span. And once that clock's done, we're done. And we move on with the next thing. So racing the clock is a really big thing. Point systems are huge, where you can assign yourself or your team points for, say, we're doing 5 points for every time you wake up and don't hit the snooze button, or every time you drink so much water, you assign yourself points. That's why Weight Watchers works so well, right? Because you're doing a point system, and you're gamifying. I mean, Weight Watchers is gamifying losing weight, because it's all based upon points. You can assign rewards. Like we kind of mentioned that on these 5 levels, is if you complete a certain level, you get a certain amount of points. You can race yourself, of saying, if there's something that you don't want to do, and you time it once you do it. So maybe it is cleaning your room. Hey, how long will it take you to clean your room and do it in a way that's acceptable and not cutting corners? How long did that take you? Right. And then maybe next time you can say, well, maybe that took you 15 minutes. Well, next time, what would it do to take 14 minutes to do that? And so cutting out those things to race yourself, and finally just challenging a friend. Good healthy competition is great. If in the Apple ecosystem, you can share your workouts, you can share your move goals so that other people can see it, and you can challenge each other. Great ways you can gamify tasks. And of course, this would not be the Teen Life podcast without ending off with some apps, some different resources that you can use to you can gamify life. Now, of course, there's always great task trackers out there. Like we use Asana here at Teen Life, but there's all kinds of different just task managers. But there's ones that kind of make it more gamified, and one's called Habatica. That's really, really popular, that assigns points to certain tasks, and you can share those. You can create a profile. The second one's really funny to me. It's called Forest. Karlie, you literally plant a tree, and if you come off of your task, the tree will die.
Oh no!
Yeah, and so basically, and I don't remember exactly how it works, but basically, it's really about keeping a tree alive. And if you fail to do your task that you've committed to, then the tree starts withering and withering, and then you have to catch up. And so it sounds really stressful, but that's one way you could gamify a task. And finally, Level Up Life is another one that I saw, and it's a little bit more web based. But it looks very like old school 80s video game, cool. Kind of pixelated graphics, those kinds of things, where you create a profile, and there's all these different domains that you can choose from. And when you achieve something, then it gives you 5 points, or you level up. And so there's all these different levels. And so it kind of gamifies just basic areas of life. So we would love to hear from you as listeners, if there's other ways or apps or techniques that you've used to gamify your tasks.
For the trend this week, Chris, we are wrapping up Mental Health Awareness Month, and we've done several mental health episodes recently, but I wanted to get in kind of one more thing about mental health, because it is so important, especially for our teenagers. But I kind of wanted to talk about maybe some terms that would be helpful to know, or that maybe even our listeners have heard and might kind of think like, oh, I kind of maybe know what that is, but not fully grasp, oh, this is exactly what this means when we're talking about mental health in our teenagers. So let's get into some of these. I know we talked a little bit, or even our last teen term episode, we talked about some mental health like Minty B.
Still makes me laugh.
Yes, I know. That's a great one. And for some reason, I am seeing that term everywhere now.
Huh.
Like once we talked about it on the podcast, like I'm seeing it on TikToks, I'm seeing it on Instagram. I heard someone, I feel like on a show lately, like say, and I was like, what in the world? Like this word is following me everywhere. So if you missed that one, that episode, I'll link it. Go back and listen to it. But today I want to talk about like maybe some more serious or like actual terms, not our funny teen terms as much. But the first one is coping skills. And this is one that we use a lot, that we talk about a lot. But these are strategies to help you deal with difficult situations and lessen negative emotions, thoughts, or behaviors.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I feel like when you say coping skills, everything kind of gets lumped into that term, and it's kind of more of a buzzy word for people. Like we're learning coping and we're learning coping skills, and I don't want this to be dismissed as something that's just another term, but learning how to deal with situations and especially difficult ones in a way that's going to we're going to manage our emotions through it is super helpful. And it's not just a throwaway term. It's really, really important.
Yes. So the next one is a lived experience. And this is one that I hear that like, I feel like I knew what it was, but seeing a definition is helpful. But this is firsthand personal experience dealing with mental health or substance abuse challenges. So if this is like, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, but this is if you have actually lived through an experience, they call it a lived experience.
Right. Right. And so you're leaning, and especially if you're working through something, you can look back and say, I've been through this before. This has been my experience. That's super helpful.
Well, and even we've talked about, especially in that shooting episode, where there's sometimes secondhand trauma. But if you say I had a lived experience in that, that's saying like, no, I like personally experienced it. It's not that yes, I was there. It's not that I got it from someone else or I saw it on social media and had issues from it. Like this is something that I personally lived through. And so that's good to know. Now, I want to talk about the difference between mental health concern and mental health condition, because those sometimes I feel like can get mixed up and thrown together a little bit. But if it's a concern, it's anything that causes a person to believe their mental health may be suffering. So it's almost that first step of like, this is something like almost like a red flag, something that I need to be aware of, where a condition is related symptoms that have been recognized by the mental health community. So a condition would almost be like that actual diagnosis.
Gotcha.
Compared to like a concern is just something that you're like, okay, I'm paying attention to this and I think that there might be something wrong. And then, for example, if you went and saw a counselor, a therapist, or a psychiatrist and they diagnosed you with something, then that would actually be a mental health condition.
I would think this would be helpful too when other people are observing someone else. And so if there's a student who someone thinks might be struggling, it's very different to suspect and actually have a diagnosis, right? And so sometimes people will diagnose a little too quickly and not actually have that full diagnosis from a professional.
Right. Or as a parent, maybe you might have concerns, but to just say, yeah, my teenager has a mental health condition, if you have not gotten that confirmed, you can't necessarily assume that.
Right.
But that you can have a mental health concern about them. And that
Absolutely.
is very valid to say. Now, a risk factor is something that increases the chances of developing a mental health condition. And so there are lots of risk factors. I feel like we talk about this anytime we talk about like anxiety or depression. We've talked about what those risk factors are, but it could be genetics. It could be your family history. It could be medications you're taking. It could be a traumatic event. All of those can be risk factors that then you want to pay attention to. Okay, is this something I need to be watching for because they are at higher risk for that?
Right.
And then finally, trauma And I feel like this one, I wanted to put this one in here because I feel like right now it is getting thrown around a lot. And it is almost become like a catch-all, like I'm so traumatized, that was traumatic. But the actual definition of trauma is an emotional response to a disturbing, scary, or shocking experience that overwhelms one's ability to cope. So I think it's important that it affects your ability to cope.
Yeah, that second half is where I think the definition really takes hold. Is, you're someone who's truly traumatized can't actually handle basic things of life after that happens. It overwhelms everything. And so, and I can't remember if we talked about this specifically on the podcast before, but I know it's been put in terms from mental health professionals as capital T and lower T trauma.
Yes.
And so capital T definitely fits this definition, where you firsthand witness something that is overwhelming your ability to actually handle the day-to-day operations of life. Little T are what maybe secondhand traumas, things that have affected you, but you still have the ability to navigate life. And so it's not to diminish it, but it's also to be able to parse out what is shutting things down and what's not.
So that brings us to our tip for this episode, which, like I said, I wanted to just kind of wrap up. I think we might even have one more episode in Mental Health Awareness Month, but it's like the very last day of May. So, but today I wanted to talk about maybe some things that make anxiety worse. But actually, I want to flip it. So I saw this Instagram post and they gave a list of things that make anxiety worse. And which is a great list and it is very helpful. But I also sometimes think it's helpful to look at it the other way. And so what we're going to do with this list is actually look at things that might help your anxiety.
Oh.
And so taking that list of like, these make anxiety worse, and like, let's look at the positive of it instead of looking maybe at the negative always.
I like it.
So some obvious things, but limiting caffeine can help anxiety. Moving your body can help anxiety. So like getting out and getting active. This one is big, and it is probably something I was just talking to someone this week. I know I don't do this well, but getting enough sleep and making sure that your body is rested and taken care of is huge for how you're going to handle anxiety. And then with that, eating regularly. Like making sure you're in a really good routine where you're getting sleep at night, you're waking up, you're eating 3 meals a day, you're getting the proper nutrition, you're moving your body. All of those things really add up and can make a big difference.
We were just talking about this, weren't we, yesterday?
Yeah, we were.
We were talking about this. Like, I think I was mentioning that, like, I didn't eat dinner last night.
Yeah.
Like, just a kind of a throwaway, like, hey, that's not okay. You need to actually eat your food. Yeah.
Exactly. And when it comes to eating too, avoiding sugar, because sugar can actually lead to anxiety if you're having high amounts of sugar. That probably also goes back to the caffeine, because I feel like most of the caffeinated beverages that our teenagers are drinking are heavily sugared as well. Cleaning your room. So making sure that you have an environment that is low anxiety and going to be like a non-anxious presence for you. Setting boundaries and saying no. So even being willing to protect your time is a really big thing. Positive people, we talked about in our anxiety episode, how to be a non-anxious presence as an adult. And so, I mean, this makes sense to me that surrounding yourself with positive people can help your anxiety. Drinking enough water is another one that I know, like, for example, my husband for sure does not do this. And I was talking to someone else yesterday that they were like, do you ever look up at night and be like, I don't think I drank any water today. It was only coffee and soda.
It can happen.
Which I feel like can also be a big thing for our teenagers. Getting fresh air, which you can obviously combine with moving your body as well if you wanted to go on a walk or do something outside. And then finally, and I think as adults in the Teen Life podcast, we talk about this quite a bit, but limiting the amount of time spent online can be huge. Making sure that you're actually interacting with real people, making sure that you're not just locked in on a screen or your phone all day. And all of these things can help with our anxiety. And with that, that's a wrap on this episode. We hope that you're already subscribed to the Teen Life Podcast, but if not, find us in your favorite podcast app. Make sure you're following us on social media, and text this episode to a friend if there's something in here that you thought that they would enjoy or find really helpful. And with that, we'll see you next week.